you a very pleasant welcome from the Global Studies and Governance program in Independent University, Bangladesh. Night is falling in Dhaka as we speak, but I wonder if that is also the case for US democracy. If we look at the news today, here are some of the words that are coming out: voting fraud, questionable voter registration, voting result delays, refusal to cede power, dubbing opponents radicals and socialists. These are terms that we have seen during the Cold War. And that is when the term third world dictatorship was coined to describe them. So I'm just wondering, is the United States developing some features of third world dictatorship? Dictatorship can be looked at least two ways. One would be the typical military dictator at the top with the junta, and basically they don't last very long. They're swallowed by society over time. But the second one is the one that disturbs us the most. It is when that resonates with society and the society gets a sense of what the dictator wants. And this is why next week's results might not be the final results we might see if that is the pattern being followed in the United States. Here are my 2 cents, the two themes, I guess, to open up this discussions as we go to each one of you in alphabetical order, hoping that in 5, 6 minutes you might be able to say a few things that we can chat about later. We are also inviting questions that we
Professor Imtiaz, we cannot hear you.
Professor Imtiaz, you are mute.
Oh, did you hear anything at all?
A
Hello?
little bit of it, the beginning of it.
Yeah, we missed you for about we missed you for about a couple of minutes.
Then basically just quickly go back. Let me just quickly go back. I wish every one of you a very pleasant welcome. And again, as I mentioned, it is from the Global Studies Governance Program, Independent University, Bangladesh. And like I was saying, that we are having nighttime falling upon us now is United States democracy also facing a night falling upon them, on it. And basically, when we look at the media today, we hear terms that bring images we associate with the Cold War: voting fraud, questionable registration of voters, refusal to cede power, all of these were basically dubbed third world dictatorship then. And so my question is that, are we seeing features of third world dictatorship now emerging in the United States? It could be dictatorship of one person or a junta, which over time gets swallowed by society. But the other one is the one that disturbs us the most, is when it resonates with society. And therefore, what might come out next week in the election might not be the final result if this is the track the United States is following. And the couple of themes I would like to throw out, the 2 cents I'd like to throw out at you, is that number one, you have a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court now. And the question arises that, will this gel US society in the next 20, 30 years or even before? Or is it going to end up creating social protests and street fighting? And therefore, that is one area that we might want to keep an eye on. A second theme or idea that's coming to my mind as something that will prolong this this election hiccup is populism. If you look at the 20th century, the United States stood out as the champion of democracy. We've heard things like making the world safe for democracy, arsenal of democracy, the four freedoms. These are the ones that got me most fascinated with the country, the biggest champion of democracy then. So is the 21st century going to be a century of populism? And we want to explore these. When we think of populism, United States, the term behind it is Make America Great. But there's also a subtitle silently following it. And this is bashing the rest of the world. Is that the way it is going to go if there is a populist United States government? So we have a galaxy of speakers today, which I hope will help shed some light on all of these. At the end of the session today, next week, we can define what America is. And I would like to begin without any introduction or anything with our speakers as they are listed in the program, in the poster. And Professor Parvez Abbasi will take us off. Can I invite you for your few words, please?
Thank you, Professor Imtiaz. I hope you can hear me. So as I'm on the clock, I will start chosen for this presentation, US elections and South Asia. The first thing is that just like the rest of the world, US elections is seen with a great degree of interest. And this is also owing to the fact because not only of close trade relations or close engagement in terms of development, but also because we have a sizable diaspora in South Asia. Only one data is going to actually drive home the point. Between 2003 and 2011, or 2018 actually, between these times, the South Asian population has grown by a proportion of 43%, and as opposed to the US average of only 4.7%. So there is a huge growth in the South Asian population. And the Indian community in the United States of America is the second largest immigrant community in South Asia. So in terms of vote powers, and also there is the Pakistani community and of course our Bangladeshi community, who play a certain degree of role in South Asian elections. And all said and done, according to recent data of the 2016 elections, around 87% of Bangladeshis, 90% of Bangladeshi Americans, 87% of Pakistani Americans, and 77% of Indian American citizens had overwhelmingly voted for the Democratic presidential candidate, which is Hillary Clinton. So yes, there is a degree of enthusiasm. For example, we have again the Howdy Modi rally, and with Prime Minister Modi being brought in by President Trump for almost electoral campaigning. And again, you had the similarly came to Trump in Gujarat. And along with this, you have the Kamala Harris phenomenon, whose mother hails from Southern India. So there is a great degree of interest in South Asia, but that is the diaspora part. But how will the US electoral results influence what happens with South Asia? That is the one key thing. And with this in the background, we have to also factor in the rise of China. And again, there is a bipartisan consensus that the rise of China is a strategic threat for the US domination. So, and it has been manifested in terms of growing opposition. At first, adverse, these were subdued criticisms, and now they're overt criticisms of BRI. So what does the election results spell for basis? I think we still have 3 minutes. The first thing is, if President Trump pulls off the unthinkable, we should not write him off. And again, then this would be more of business and also military engagement. But what if most likely again Joe Biden managed and stop this populist trend, so to speak? Again, there is debate for and against this. Then it is expected that the US would return to its old diplomatic strategies, especially in terms of multilateral approach, trying to build a coalition. And already we see this process ongoing, because when we see the effort of basically building, turning to an Asian NATO, so you're using the Quad, an alliance of US, Australia, India, and Japan, and you're trying to turn it into an Asian NATO. And again, this is also to basically contain the rise of China, so to speak. So what will be the fronts where we can expect tangible changes? These are, again, mind you, I must say that these are, again, speculation borne out by certain facts. But again, it remains to be seen. Number one, there'll be greater emphasis on technology. Already the ball has been rolling by this current administration. And the way that the 5G technology and Huawei's rise, now this has been, there's been great degree of opposition by the US-led coalition, so to speak. And the fact that there's a huge amount of investment flowing into Reliance's Geophone as a sort of building it up as a clean technology. Now that is also a portent of the future. And the fact is that number two would be again the health Silk Road that is again purported by China. Vaccine diplomacy is still key as long as the COVID pandemic threat looms large. And what the Chinese are doing is in terms of distribution of masks, medicines, and vaccine clinical trials, and their use of Chinese digital apps like WePay and Alipay and WeChat. These Chinese apps are being used to basically go for contact tracing and quarantine enforcement. So you almost have Chinese apps, digital technology, and also vaccine diplomacy all put into this. So how's the US going to counter this? Are they going to develop the vaccine first and turn it into a global public common good, which will be distributed free of cost? So with the Biden presidency, there might be substantial progress in this direction. And number three would be basically the digital currency platform that is being launched by China, the DCEP, which is a virtual Bitcoin version of yuan. And what the Chinese are doing is trying to build up a digital platform whereby they can circumvent US sanctions by the Treasury Department. And thus, countries such as Iran and Russia would be flowing into the DCEP, which operates on blockchain technology. So what would be the US response? Would it be sponsoring more companies like Facebook in terms of Libra and other Bitcoin technologies, or is it going to try to outright ban this? And the fourth one would be a very key emphasis, the Global Magnitsky Act. The weaponization of Global Magnitsky Act is something of key concern, especially in countries where BRI projects are running. And the most recent example was in Cambodia, whereby a Chinese company, which was responsible for construction in the Dara Shokor coastal resort area along the Chinese coastline and South China Sea. Now that was again targeted by the US Treasury Department in terms of human rights infringement and damages to the environment. Across South Asia, which has BRI projects on terms of accountability, on terms of transparency. And the fact remains that there is, whether there's a Trump presidency or whether there's a Biden presidency, there's growing proximity between US and China. And that could be manifested by the P+2 agreement over here, because you had the signing of the Baker agreement, and you also had the signing of which is basically geospatial intelligence sharing agreement that you had. And also there was also the MISTA agreement. So all of those agreements means there's a greater degree of cooperation between India and USA. But that poses a question for the other South Asian countries, namely Bangladesh, because Bangladesh also needs to be seen in its own light, but not from the light reflected from the prism of New Delhi. So we need to pursue strategic equiproximity and not go for global entanglements. as has been repeatedly mentioned by our current regime. Now, what has happened over here is we cannot afford to fall into any kind of entanglements which smacks of Cold War antagonism. So we need Chinese investment, infrastructural investment, and we need continuous engagement with the US and India. How we strike a balance is an issue that we, not only Bangladesh, but other countries like Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bhutan all need to actually look and explore. But we cannot be forced to choose sides, because again, one of the most recent initiatives, again, it's all about infrastructure. And this is again a certification exercise that is being brought about, and whereby infrastructure projects will be graded by US, Australia, and Japan. Yes.
We can come back
so,
to the discussion.
I think I have nearly finished up my time. Yes. All right. Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much. We would like to go to the ambassador, ex-ambassador to the United States, in fact, Ambassador Humayun Kabir, a good friend of mine, first met him in Washington. It's all yours, bye.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Imtiaz Bhai, for just inviting me to share some thoughts here. I think I am in the midst of a galaxy of, I can see Ambassador Tariq Karim, I can see Ali Riaz and other scholars. I mean, it would be really interesting evening to hear from them. From my side, what I would like to say is that I have been observing the US election since 1988 when I was posted there as a young officer. And one of the recurring themes that we have been hearing about is that the US voters are not interested, not engaged, they don't vote, and so on and so forth. But this time, I mean, situation is completely different. And I would like to categorize them into three boxes. One is the run up to the election, what we are seeing now, as you have said in your introduction. On the one hand, we are seeing a new appointment of a new justice at the Supreme Court, which has tilted the court in one direction. We are seeing very explosive languages coming from the top leadership down to the grassroots level. At the same time, we are also seeing a massive turnout of voters who are voting early. To date, 68.5 million, almost, if we assume that 150 million people would be voting in the US election, next election, almost 68.5 billion have already cast their vote. So there are mail-in votes that are on their way. And then the November 3rd electoral day or election day, the voting will take place. So one thing that seems to be a trend evolving is the massive involvement of the young people, young voters. I think compared to 2016, which was one of the lowest year of voter turnout, this year we are seeing extraordinary enthusiasm, and particularly among the young voters. And some scholars are saying, observers are saying, this is possibly a continuation of the recent movements like Black Lives Matters on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the white supremacist resurgence in certain areas. So in any case, we are seeing massive voter turnout, and my sense is that this would be the largest turnout that we are going to see. Now the question is, what is going to happen on the election day? The second box. There are expression of fears, for example. We have seen in Portland recently the white supremacist group coming out in the open with arms. They have also came to New York and many other cities. So there is a fear among many voters that on the election day, vote centers might be occupied, there could be threats, physical threats to their lives and so on and so forth. So I think my feeling is that during the next 7 days, we might see almost 100 million voting there, casting their votes. So that might happen, and that will clearly, I mean, the observation is that bulk of these voters are essentially voting in favor of the Democratic Party candidate. That's the understanding. Then comes the election day. We should understand the election day is limited time, 1 day. How many people 1 day can accommodate? So there could be some problems there. Now, the third point is the post-election scenario. This is something we have never had in the US. There were two instances, major instances, where there were problems with election results and accession or acceptance by both the parties. One was in 1876, where there was a problem and there was a serious possibility of violence. And then in 2000, we saw recently, many of us can remember that. But it was decided, Al Gore accepted, President Bush, he became the president of the United States. So it was resolved like that. But this time, it could be different. President Trump is already saying that he will not accept the results. And we don't know what will happen. And now, if he doesn't accept the results, now the question is, results are coming when? There are discussion, is it coming on the third or fourth night, or it could be election night, or it could be election week, or election month? We don't know. So that kind of uncertainty will definitely have some impact. And there are people are thinking that there are, there could be consequences for that. One is the consequence of violence. If President Trump, who is unique, and he might declare himself as the winner, and in that case, how the institutions will react, how the international community will react, for example. And as we know, under the US Constitution, it is the Congress that will certify the winner. Now, there is another chunk of problem area we are seeing. The Congress, 1/3 of Senate, and the House, entire House is also going for elections. And their results will be coming in. And I don't know what will happen to their result. If their results show that the Congress has gone to, I would say, lower house has gone to the Democratic Party, which they are thinking, and if the Senate also gets flipped, then it would be a different kind of scenario. So all these are possibilities that we are seeing, and how the US institutions are going to organize or respond to that, there is no question. Nobody has any answer to these questions. We are just waiting for them. But as countries, I think Basi has just mentioned that the whole world is now in anticipation. But I would finish by saying that I would like to put my words or put my hope on a few things. One is that if we look at the United States, one skill that they have developed is that they have developed the skills for conflict resolution. So even if there is a conflict, it may create a threat of violence. But my sense is that United States as a country may be able to resolve that conflict peacefully. One example I would give: for the last few days, huge turnout has taken place, but there was no incidence of violence here. So that indicates that if the people stand up for their rights, then violence may not take place, and we might see a peaceful transfer. That is one. The second thing is international community has a role on that as well. For example, OSCE observers are already observing the election. Their certification would create, would I would say, carry some value for itself. And then recognizing the US election as valid by the international community would perhaps also give some or provide some influence to decide how the US will be resolving their potential electoral dispute or conflict. I hope there will be there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Bhai. We shall come back to you in the discussions, but let's go to Dr. Jeffrey Mcdonald. And here the question I have for you, Jeffrey, is that do you follow democracy, or does democracy follow you in your professional work?
Well, thank you, Imtiaz, and thank you for the invitation to to speak here today. I've been looking forward to this event. It's always fun and interesting to see American politics through the lens of another country. So I've been looking forward to the questions and discussion. I'm currently in DC, so I'm in the heart of American politics right now. Today, I'll briefly discuss voter mobilization in the Republican and Democratic parties. What are the key constituencies for each party? How do these parties try to mobilize these constituencies through issues? And then I'll conclude briefly with a prediction about the election, which you can all hold me to next week for part 2 of this conversation, see if I'm correct. And just a note, Dr. Momin is going to talk about the Electoral College and swing states a bit later, which is closely related to my topic, but I'll leave that issue to her. So what are the key constituencies of each party? Right? I want to break this down by 5 factors: race, age, education, population density, and geographic region. So according to race, right, the Democratic Party, the core constituent of the Democratic Party are Black and Hispanic voters. Black voters vote overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party, 90% plus. Hispanic voters tend to vote 2/3 for the Democratic Party. The Republican Party tends to win a majority of the white vote. In terms of age, Democrats tend to win those under the age of 45, whereas Republicans tend to win those over the age of 45. On education, Democrats tend to do better with those with a college degree, though it's not a large advantage, but they tend to have an advantage there, whereas Republicans have a very large advantage with those without a college degree. On population density, urban areas, cities are a stronghold of the Democratic Party, whereas rural areas, less populated areas, are a stronghold of Republicans. And on geography, Democrats tend to do better in the Northeast, West Coast, states like New York and California, whereas Republicans do better in the South, right, Southeast, and the rural Midwest. Of course, these are generalizations, right? Each party has a mix of voters from different races, ages, education levels, and areas, but these are the core constituencies of each party, right? So in the Democratic Party, Black and Hispanic voters under the age of 45 with a college degree in urban areas of the Northeast and West Coast are very strongly Democratic voters. In the Republican Party, white voters over 45 with no college degree in rural areas of the South and Midwest, very strongly in the Republican Party's favor. So how are the parties trying to mobilize these constituencies right now during the campaign? Democrats are trying to mobilize their core constituency while also trying to win over some traditional Republicans, right? So they're trying to turn out urban voters, Black and Hispanic voters, young white liberals, with a message that Trump is racially insensitive, if not outright racist, right? He supports white nationalism, he has harsh rhetoric against immigrants, he's divisive on social issues, right? This is a message of the Democrats. They're also trying to win over traditional Republicans, right? They're trying to win over older voters with a message about a better response to coronavirus, right? Which has been rising steadily in the United States. They're trying to win over the working class white voters with a more moderate message on economic and cultural issues. And they're also trying to win over the suburbs, which are a key battleground for this election, with a message of kind of calm and unity in contrast to the chaos and division of the Trump administration. In contrast, the Republicans are focusing on mobilizing their core constituency, really, rather than reaching out to win over traditional Democrats. It's trying to push out the base, right? So their message is that Democrats are radical on economic and social issues, right? They're pro-abortion, they're anti-police, they want higher taxes, they support socialism or socialist policies. And they're trying to keep a hold on white, rural, and suburban areas with a kind of essentially a message of fear, right? Be afraid of Democrats, right? Democratic-run cities have racial violence, they have poverty, and this is going to come to the suburbs and the rural areas if Democrats win. So who's going to win, right? And this is, of course, an open question. Right now, the polling suggests a very significant advantage for Joe Biden, who's projected to win over 320 electoral votes. Dr. Momin will talk a bit about the Electoral College later. At this point in the 2016 race, the polls were tightening between Trump and Hillary Clinton, currently the polls haven't tightened significantly, right? So if these polls hold, Biden will likely win, but it is worth noting that in several key battleground states, it's a close election, right? And there's still 6 days to go, so the polls can in fact tighten. So again, I'll be back next week for the second round of this discussion, and you can hold me to this prediction, and we can look through some of the data and see how this all turned out. But I'll leave it there. Thank you all for your attention, and I'll turn it over back to Imtiaz and the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Jeffrey. That was beautifully timed and very poignantly placed. And we will hold you one way or the other next week. Let's move to Dr. Amina Mohsin. She's not just going to be emphasizing the gender issue, but she's been basically a beacon on that in Dhaka, not only in the department she teaches, but also the Journal of International Relations that she manages. Up to you, Dr. Mohsin.
Thank you very much, Imtiaz Bhai, for that very kind introduction, for your kind words. In a way, I think I'm filling in a gap or a dimension that I find normally to be missing. And that's why, when Marufa was discussing with me about which point to emphasize, we jointly decided that let us talk about the gender dynamics in US elections. And or maybe I'm covering a little bit of the gender dimension in US politics, society, everything, but here I'll be focusing on the elections. Before I go directly into the election issue, let me just, cite one survey findings, which was held in 2018 by Thomson Reuters Foundation. And it found that US is, in 2018, I mean, that was the last time that the survey was made, is the only Western country which made it to the top 10 countries which were considered to be the most insecure countries for women. So with that, I would like to introduce this topic that, or whatever I want to say, that what is the location of women in the US? I mean, it was unbelievable for me that US would rank among the top, though its position was 10 in the ranking, but it was among the top 10 countries, most insecure countries for women. Normally we think that it is a bastion of democracy, everybody is safe and secure over there, but figures, data, and things say otherwise. Later on, I might come back if people have questions about what were the indicators of security and insecurity. Let me start with that, this, why I cite this figure or survey result, there's a reason behind it. Because, this is the way, how the society looks at women, how women are positioned within a society, that is very important. I mean, this brings me, to Hillary Clinton's 2016 race, and also Kamala Harris, her position at this point of time. And it was interesting for me to find, Kamala Harris is finding in a way the triple bind or triple burden of, she's carrying the triple burden of gender, racism, and sexism. And it is interesting to note that, before she went for the debate, the vice presidential debate, there was a search in Google search about her birthism. Where she was born, whether she was born in the United States of America or not. I mean, so you can see the kind of racism and sexism that was associated with it. And if you go through different literature on the US elections, one would find that the general feeling over there is that, okay, women are okay, they are likable. But if you want someone in a leadership position, then it has to be a man. Leadership, there is a difference between leadership and likable. So I'm making the differentiation that, how you look, how a society looks at women, and the kind of language that has been used. I mean, political analysts have said that that is extraordinary, even by the standards that Trump normally uses for Kamala Harris. And the way he pronounces her first name and the way he mocks her, I mean, it is unbelievable. I was just thinking, to myself that if this thing was happening in Bangladesh or in South Asia, how the women organizations or how the women movement would have reacted to such things. Perhaps Mehnaz can talk more about it, or perhaps Ali Riaz and Dr. Jeffrey, he can also talk much more about it. But it's also about respecting women, and the kind of labels that had been used, like for Michelle Obama, that she was an angry black woman. Hillary Clinton was labeled as a nasty woman, nagging wife. And then for Kamala Harris also, one kind comes across different kind of labeling. So this is, I mean, I find it very strange that that a society tolerates it, but it has its impact. Like that's why I'm making these points, that the gender dynamics in the US elections, that how it brings out the racism, the sexism that is there embedded in a society, and one has to think about it when you call a society democratic, and democracy, what it means for the human beings or the people living over there. Okay, coming back to the issue of gender gap. Uh, it has been, like about the gender gap, political analysts are suggesting that 2020 elections might be the year of women voters. That has been pointed out by political analysts. And gender gap is the difference between the percentages of women and men voters, generally for the leading and winning candidate. And if we look at the gender gap, it emerged in the US elections very significantly back in the 1980s, when President Ronald Reagan, he came out with his plan of expanding the US defense expenditure. Uh, he supported a constitutional ban on abortion, and with different kind of conservative policies. So since 1980, gender gap has been playing a significant role, or a critical role, in determining about which candidate is going to win. And in 2016, we find that this gender gap was around 11%. And what happened that when it was not until the late October, when the FBI decided to open up the investigation about Hillary Clinton's emails, that we find that the undecided voters, both men and women, they decided to vote for Trump. But one finds that again in the 2018 midterm elections, one finds that the Democrats, they came with a majority. And there the gender gap made a very significant difference. In 2020, we are finding that the gender gap is between 10 to 12 points. And here, when I say the gender gap and when I talk about women, I'm not saying that women are voting as a homogeneous category. Like my earlier speaker had said that, there are different divides. So we have the college educated women, we have the non-college educated women, we have the suburban women, we have the elderly women, we have the women of color. All these categories are there. as he pointed out, Dr. Jeffrey, that college educated people, they generally vote for the Democrats. And this time, the survey findings are showing that the non-college educated are also, they are going for the Democrats. I don't know what the results are going to be, but these are the results of the different surveys. And the suburban women.
Dr. Mohsin, can we come back to you after, take a minute and then we'll come back to you in the discussions?
Can I just wind up in a minute?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Please.
suburban women are also going ahead, and overwhelmingly we are seeing that they are voting, they are favoring Democrats. The elderly women are, it is the same for them. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's go to Dr. Menas Momin. And what can I say about her? Her father, who was both a vice chancellor here and my first teacher, international relations in the department. He was one of the founders of that department. All yours, Menas.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. And hello, everyone. You probably are in a pleasant evening in Dhaka, but I'm in Texas. And fortunately, the weather has turned a little bit, colder, and it's much more pleasant. And why I'm talking about my location is very important. As you know, Texas is supposed to be a deep red state. This weekend, the vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, was in Texas, in Dallas, because apparently the polls are predicting Texas may be in play. And the title of my talk, or what I'm going to focus on today, is on the battleground states, swing states. Okay, and anyone who is familiar with the system of election, the Electoral College in America, they know about the swing states. So the vast majority of the states, we know which political party has the dominance, whether it's a Republican dominance, Democratic dominance, red state or blue state. And then there are some states, maybe a handful of states, like 5 to 10, which are the purple states, which can go either way, which often decides who is the winner. Now, historically, there would be some shift, like for instance, Colorado became a blue state from a purple state. But like among all the battleground states, the three most important states were Ohio, Virginia, and Florida. And anyone who won two of these three states ended up winning the election. But no Republican president have won the presidency without Ohio. But in 2016, this calculation or this measurement actually went out of the window. Because in 2016, we see like a new equation, new states joined the battleground states, and some of the battleground states, which actually were the, called the predictor of election, they were not on the board anymore. Okay, for instance, if you look at Virginia before 2016 was one of the most important battleground states, but now it is solidly blue. For Ohio also, we have seen in 2016 and 2018 consequent election that it has turned more red. Now it is supposed to be, polls predict that it may be at play, but most probably it's going to go for the Republican. And if it does, then it joins the, more of a red state rather than being a purple state. But in 2016 election, another important thing happened. There are three states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which actually became the battleground states. Wisconsin and Michigan, even though they have a smaller number of electoral, college seats, but they were solidly blue. So that was actually something like very astonishing in that election. And most probably, if either of the states, could have remained blue, Hillary Clinton would have won the electoral. So this is something very, very, very important that happened. So in this election, these two states are also, playing a very important role. That's why we are seeing a lot of the lawsuits. For instance, in Wisconsin, they just changed the law that they're only going to count the mail-in ballots that they receive by the, by voting day, as opposed to the ballots that are postmarked by the voting day. So like earlier, Ambassador Humayun Kabir was talking about the lack of violence in the US election, which is true, but in US election, the violence is not the means for voter suppression. The voter suppression actually happens by discounting the ballots, okay? So in Wisconsin, with the change of this one law, how many ballots they are going to count? I mean, they have actually a lot of people, you know, if their ballot doesn't reach, you know, the proper place by the voting day. And because we are also having the post office is overburdened, so they may even mail the ballot like well ahead, but the ballot may not reach there. So that would be discounted. Okay. So a lot of these lawsuits we are finding in these battleground states. Pennsylvania, they just had a lawsuit about the, about again, which ballots they can disqualify and which they cannot. Okay. So we are seeing in this election, the swing states that will probably play a very important role are Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Among them, about, in Michigan and Wisconsin, probably the polls are much more predictable because the difference between the Democrats, probability of the Democrats or Republicans winning the state is actually much more. So most probably Wisconsin and Michigan are going to go back to the Democrats and remain blue. But what will be very interesting, the two states that I predict are going to be the most important states in this election are Florida and Pennsylvania. And even though the poll numbers, like on average in the national poll numbers, Biden is doing very, very well. He's well ahead. But the most important polls are not the national aggregate polls. The most important polls are the ones that are in the swing states. Okay. So in Florida and also in America, it seems like the last 3 weeks prior to the election is when people pay most attention to the polls. And actually the vast majority of the people, they are already decided who they are going to vote for. And we already, can predict that. But the people who are making up their mind in the last 3 weeks, that is actually the crucial part. So, okay, and in the recent time in Florida, the poll actually has tightened. Okay, so in the election night, and Florida also plays another important part because different states has different rules when they can start counting the mail-in ballots, and Florida actually can start ahead. So most probably the election result from Florida will be one of the first, even though that's a populous state. And if Trump can retain Florida, he is in play. If Trump cannot retain Florida, then most probably Biden is going to win with a landslide. But even if Trump retains Florida, still, there is a, very decent, the paths to winning for presidency for Biden doesn't, there are plenty of paths there. But then it all comes to Pennsylvania. And another interesting part is a lot of these battleground states, already we are seeing lawsuits, like in Texas, where I am, the governor a week back kind of made up a rule out of nowhere that in each county, there can be only one drop of box for the mail-in ballot. So if you're talking about a small county, let's say a couple of thousand people, that's fine. But, Texas has Harris County, which has 4.5 million people, right? I mean, which has the city of Houston. So if you have one drop box for the mail-in ballot, you can imagine the kind of chaos, it would create, right? So a lot of the, what will happen in the battleground states, we have to look at these kind of, lawsuits, and most probably there will be more lawsuits after the election. And that's where, if these lawsuits go to the Supreme Court, that's actually another scenario. And most probably Dr. Ali Riaz is going to, scare us with the possible scenarios. So I'm not going to take that fun, from him. But another.
Do you mind if we go to him and then we'll come back to the whole discussions, Mehnaz?
Okay.
I appreciate it so much. We'll come around. Thank you so much. We must go to the state that produced the Democracy of the People, by the people, and for the people. Professor Ali Riaz from Illinois, please.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. And already Professor Mehna's moment has created an environment that I'm going to scare people. However, I'm going to paint three possible scenarios that we are about, or at least in my understanding, is going to happen. Most of us are speculating at this point, given the all the opinion polls that we have. Absolutely correct that the Pennsylvania would be a crucial one. And definitely it is true that Biden has many paths. It doesn't have to go through Pennsylvania only. Florida plays out. Of course, I am more interested in Arizona as well. Possibly Arizona would put a wrench in, in Trump's all the expectation, because the way we are witnessing what is going on in Arizona. I'm least, or I'm less optimistic about Texas turning blue than Arizona turning blue. Having said that, there are three things or three scenarios that I am trying to look into, some of them beyond the election, some of them related to this. Number one, over the last years, particularly since 2016, with the rise of Mr. Trump and his ascendance to power, what we have seen is the deconsolidation of US democracy. Plain and simple. The institutions have been pretty much taken a hit, whether it's the quote unquote, the enemy of the people, according to Mr. Trump, the media. Court is now completely shifted. Not only the Supreme Court, more than 200 judges have been appointed in the federal courts all around the country. Most of them have a clear agenda with respect to Roe versus Wade, that is the rights of the women to have the abortion, and several other things, considering the EPA and all sorts of things. But most importantly, why does deconsolidation happen? This is the lack of interest from the public, lack of participation from the voters, the electorate. They had lost, or at least had a serious doubt about the Congress, about the presidency, about the politics itself. That is what allowed to this deconsolidation to take place, which is worrying. It is more worrying to me than having sporadic violence. I'm coming to violence later, the sporadic violence, because this is the institutional decay of US politics that we have seen over the decade, and the alienation of a large number of people. 2016 had a very low number of participation. Imagine the situation. So with that in mind, what makes me a little bit optimistic today, and we are talking on the 28th of October, a week before the election, just a week, today, less than a week, with having these 70 plus million people already casting vote and expecting that there will be, this is going to be a record one since 1908. It could reach to 63, 64%, which I know if you're listening from Bangladesh and you'd say, wow, 63% is great. Yes, for the United States, for us, it is a great number, 63, 64%. If it reaches 65%, that means people are coming back. They took it seriously that this is a historic election. They have to make a decision that to change the direction of this country's future. And I consider this as a historic one. Not only because of the COVID, not only because of the Black Lives Matter, but most importantly, they see it as an important, that's why they're voting early, because they think their vote counts. Yes, the suppression is there. Texas is the case in point, and we have seen all sorts of things in Wisconsin and elsewhere. And throughout the South, we have seen that kind of thing. One state doesn't have an early voting, as you can understand. And all these things notwithstanding, people, US citizens, electorate have found that this is an important election. This is an important election. And I agree with them. This is going to set the direction. Professor Imtiaz at the beginning laid out some of the things which clearly shows that US is in a I would say, in a cusp, in a crossroads, whether the democracy would sustain in the manner that we expect it to sustain, despite its weaknesses, despite its limitations. This is the moment. It is, whether it's 3rd November, whether it's 4th November, 5th November, that's a different thing. But definitely United States has reached to a point, and I am a little bit optimistic than I would have been, say, summer or even early September. The enormous number of participation is giving me a little bit of hope that people have understood the importance of it. The consolidation might or might not be stopped at this point because it's not so easy, but there is a hope there. But that's the first thing, that whether it would be a moment where the United States takes a turn, US politics takes a turn towards focusing on democracy, participation, inclusiveness, and making sure that it is actually respecting its commitment not only to its own citizens but to the world, because United States, everything that happens in the United States happen to have an impact elsewhere globally. So that is the number one thing that this is the moment. What kind of scenario, we don't know yet. I'm a little bit optimistic, not so much, given that it is a tall order. It's a very difficult task. The Supreme Court, a major institution, has already turned right. Where it would go, we don't know. The second thing is whether this election would be decided by the electorate or the court. This is the question that I'm asking, despite the fact that there's a huge number. Why that might be the case? Number one, we have seen in case of Pennsylvania, the state federal court decided that they would allow. The Republicans went to the Supreme Court, but the moment Supreme Court decided that it should stay with the state. But exactly the different question was with respect to Wisconsin. They said no, state court. And here is a footnote to a verdict that came out of Supreme Court, right? Justice Kavanaugh wrote a footnote, and whether that footnote would decide. What is the footnote? He said the state courts doesn't have the last word. If the state court doesn't have the last word, what does that mean? If there are controversies with respect to Wisconsin, for example, with respect to Pennsylvania, and given Professor Mehnaz Momin has underscored, and everyone understands that Pennsylvania matters. If that is the case, and it's not only Pennsylvania, it could happen to other states. If the counting is delayed, then if that is challenged, that the mail-in vote issue, absentee ballot, and here in Pennsylvania, the so-called quote-unquote, the naked ballot question, whether you put it in the right envelope, whether you've signed it, whether signature matched, and all sorts of things that are happening. If there are challenges, if it goes to the court, if the footnote that Kavanaugh has written 2 days ago, that the state courts do not have the last word, when it goes to the Supreme Court, we know what is going to happen. I mean, we may try to put a sugarcoat in it. We should show some respect that someone else might decide differently. But nevertheless, we know. What would be the impact of that? Most of the electorate, and this is not 2000, it's not a 2000 election that just because Biden is going to accept and everyone would accept. I don't think so, because there is a social movement. And not only the Black Lives Matter, there's a growing, increasing understanding with respect to the necessity of having this involvement, inclusiveness. And that's why people are voting. Those who are taking hours to vote and will take hours to vote and will mail in their vote, are they going to stop and say, okay, just because it happened in 2000, we have accepted it, are they going to accept it? I don't think so. I don't think that is going to happen, because court cannot have the final word with respect to the electorate's wishes. So that is the second scenario that might actually complicate the whole thing. And then we have these underlying things, whether it should go to the Congress. If it goes to the Congress, which Ambassador Mankubir mentioned, I've written about it, that if it goes to the Congress, what will happen? How it is going to play out? Because the current composition is tilted towards the Republican because of 22-24 situation. That is the second consideration that I would like to keep. And the third one is, let's assume democracy, and I live in Illinois, and as of today, the blue wall has becoming solid. The blue wall, the blue wall that we saw previously, that is Wisconsin, Michigan, that is the core of that blue. I presume it is coming back. It is at this moment it is. So the blue wall is Pennsylvania has been won, Florida might have shifted, Arizona has won. It's a blowout. Let's say it's a blowout. It's a blue wave. It's a tsunami. What
can we leave it at that, Professor Riaz?
Yeah, just let me finish. What will happen with that movement that we have seen of these white supremacists? That how they're going to react to it? Because Mr. Trump has already questioned the legitimacy of this election. They have bought into it. It's in their head that this election, if he doesn't win, this is an illegitimate. How they are going to react to it? Let me keep that at it, and we'll come back to this if you have any more questions.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Ali Riaz. We'll come back to all of you. I just want to say before we go to some of you that next week, the 5th of November, same time, we'll finish this series with the second part. And before we go anywhere else, I would like to go to one of our hosts, Aparajo, which is hosting us here, and Mr. Mahmoud Menon, who has witnessed a couple of elections before in his professional duty as a journalist. Can you take a couple of minutes to share a few observations with us?
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for inviting me in this discussion, and especially Operajo Bangla has opportunity to host this program. Actually, I should remember the day, the election night of 2016, when I was there and in New York at Javits Convention Center. I was waiting for the election results, and when the time is came closer, and we could understand that things are getting different. So I personally had to run some 7-8 blocks to Donald Trump Center from Javits Center, from where Hillary was waiting for her results. And that night was really exciting for every journalist, you know. So actually, that is the biggest difference that I see this year in the election, that newspapers or the journalists are predicting less than the election 2016 this year, which I see in the news media reports as well. This is a common thing that is I should mention here. And the other thing is the protocol of reporting. This year is some different because the COVID-19 situation has compelled the reporters to to write the whole thing in a different way. And the other area that I would like to mention that this year, the misinformation that started last election, and this year it's much, the misinformation is there, and journalists are handling the reporting with some more cautious approach, and which thing we need to cover, which thing we need not to cover, which thing we will cover, and which we will avoid. All these are also being taken care of. And as you know, the social media as a eco-center, it's again has some influence on the whole mainstream reporting, and which is different from the 2016 election. Though 2016 was also some social media influence in the result or in the whole voting system, and the data journalism, fact checking, all these things are there. So I find this kind of these 4 or 5 differences in reporting that we noticed in 2016 or even 2012 when I was that was also covered by me, and I see these differences are there. So with all this, I should say that in the conclusion that this year election, though Professor Ali Riaz has already said the blue is getting solid blue wall is getting solid, which may be true in the days, but after seeing most of the people have, or lots of people have already casted their vote. So we need to wait for that election night again for this.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Menon. Before we turn to all of you, I would like to pluck out a couple of the many questions we have. And I'm just picking two because they're directed to specific speakers. And the first one is from Abrar Mahmood, and it is to Jeffrey. What might be the effect of recent data breach in election data claimed by the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, announced at such moment in running the election? And the second one, will come to you, Jeffrey, in a minute. The second one is by Nazifa Raida. It is basically to Parvez. What do you think the US dynamics with China would be if Biden wins? Let's begin these two and the rest of you can get in. Thank you. Jeffrey first, please.
Sure. Thank you for the question. You know, I personally am not that concerned about foreign influence in American elections. You know, we saw in 2016 and we see today, certainly there's an interest, there's propaganda, there's an effort, right, to shape the outcome of American elections. The reality is that American elections are so decentralized that it's very hard to have any kind of impact on the elections. There's no one election commission in the United States. There are 50, actually 51 election commissions. And the reality of voter fraud on a level that would shape the outcome of an election, whether that's driven domestically or internationally, I think is very limited. So I'm not particularly concerned. I think it's important to note that international foreign actors want to shape the outcome of the election, but I'm not too concerned about how much direct impact it will have.
Thank you so much. Nazifa? No, it is Mehnaz, I think. No, Parvez.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you. I believe the question was directed at me regarding the approach of the US administration if Joe Biden goes to the White House. So
yes,
again,
quick answer.
I believe that was the question. Good. So again, two things over here. The US would be, I would think, more subtle in its approach in terms of dealing with China. So there could be, well, if not a detente, at least the damaging or bruising trade war that you had, the tariff wars, that might basically phase out. And the approach could be more on the human rights centric approach to China, for example. And my guess, again, this is my estimate, is that there will be selective human rights issues. For example, the issue already that you have over here on Hong Kong, or for that matter in Xinjiang, or for that matter in Tibet, or for that matter in Inner Mongolia. Those issues would be highlighted on global platforms by US agencies. And number two would be basically targeting BRI-related projects. So within South Asia, because I'm discussing within South Asia, this could be on CPEC in Pakistan, CIMEC in Myanmar, or for that matter in other countries in South Asia where BRI projects are undergoing. And there would be, again, human rights issues talking about minorities, or for that matter, whether you have the insurgency in Balochistan, that could be highlighted. Or we have an ongoing Rohingya crisis. And again, the Rakhine issue in the northern Rakhine state, that could be highlighted. And again, the third area where there could be possible engagement is blocking China's technological advancement drive. So coming up with the alternative technological platforms, especially in terms of the internet and digital connectivity, this is another area where the US could aggressively use through the Asian Quad. And again, bringing in Japan for investment. And already we have something called the Build Act, whereby you have actually set up a new office, the DFC. So as a result, this could be the one which would be streaming US investment in association with Japan and Australia and other like-minded countries to come up with an alternative investment option for the Chinese. So those could be the issues. And we could see a Game of Thrones in BRI countries for those who are pro-BRI and anti-BRI. So there would be a a war actually, or let's say a Cold War to a certain extent. Again, we need to see how the events pan out. Thank you.
Huge publication opportunity, Pervez. Ambassador Tariq Karim has two questions. I'm going to throw one. This is directed to anyone in the United States here tonight. I'm going to direct it to Menas. Professor Ali Riaz can also intervene. Jeffrey has spoken. I will go back to him if you want to add something more. And this is to explain the Electoral College to the public. Menas, please.
Okay, the Electoral College system, basically what it does is, it instead of a direct democracy where people are elected by popular vote, it's an indirect democracy. People have to win the majority in the, in the states to win the, all the seats in that particular state. So all of the 50 states, there are like a number of, they have like a number of electoral college seats. And based on how people in that state vote, the 48 states give the winner all the electoral college seats in that state. There are only 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, that divided by the proportional vote. Okay. Now, in terms of the Electoral College, there are other issues which never actually emerged as issues, but this time it may, because in Electoral College, the assumption is, however way the people in the state votes, the Electoral College representatives are supposed to vote that way. They are supposed to honor the vote of the people. But if they defy that, if they choose another person, actually they can do that, and the only fine is, I think, $1,000 that they have to pay if they defy the choice of the voters. So far there has been like 1 or 2 cases of symbolic vote which had no impact on the overall election. But this is another kind of scenario, which the Trump administration was looking over, because who decides who sits in the Electoral College? It's actually the state legislature. So there can be, I mean, I don't want to go into details because it can become so complicated, and most probably we are not going to face that scenario. Maybe Dr. Riaz has something to add to it.
With respect to those,
I would like to go to the Dr. Riaz. The corollary to that question is that will the Electoral College be scrapped, please?
Thank you. I mean, with respect to the Electoral College, what Professor Momin was referring to is called faithless electorate. That means those who are supposed to vote for certain candidates representing a state, they might decide something different. In 2016, 7 of them actually did so. 5 of them were supposed to vote Hillary Clinton, they didn't. 2 of them were supposed to vote Mr. Trump, they didn't. So having said that, faithless electorates have not shaped the election ever. Last time, I recall in 2016, after the election took place, there was a massive campaign on behalf of several civil society groups who were appealing to the electorate to become faithless electorate and vote against Mr. Trump. But that didn't happen. And of course, not all states have not all states have this penalty kind of thing. I guess, if I'm correct, only 22 states have that kind of thing. Jeffrey, you might help me later to correct this one. To my recollection, it's about 22, 23 states which can find. Rest of them. Last year, there was a Supreme Court judgment with respect to this, that states can actually determine how they would penalize. Going back to the second point, that whether the possibility of electoral college being scrapped, as of now, the likelihood is very slim, despite the fact that if we are talking 10 years ago, people wouldn't have cared much. Nowadays, they do care more. And it is absolutely true. The US Constitution is very difficult to amend. Hence, this might be a lingering one. But the most important thing is this, and again, here it is my opinion. It is an arcane system, and it is in some ways very racist system to my judgment. Definitely it is, I would not consider it as very much democratic, despite the fact that those who support it has long-standing arguments about it. I haven't bought into it. So I don't see it happening soon, but there would be movement. There are more vocal demands with respect to changing it than it used to be 10 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Can I throw it to all of you? Would we be having a civil war if Trump refuses to accept the results? Anyone? Jeffrey, maybe?
Sure, I can start on that question. I think the president has signaled he's not going to accept the outcome of the election, at least rhetorically, should he lose. I do not think that's going to lead to a civil war. Could it lead to protests? Could it lead to some small scale violence? Of course it could. I think what we're likely to see is if Joe Biden were to win, Donald Trump will claim fraud. Most of the Republican Party, mainstream Republicans, will accept the outcome of the election, and the system and institutions will kind of move forward, whether the president accepts it or not. So I'm not, I guess I am optimistic on that sense, in that I think the outcome of the election, ultimately, it will be accepted by both sides.
If I may add to this, I mean, the fear of civil war is a bit exaggerated, I would say. I completely agree with you. However, I would like to add to this. This should come down to the Republican Party, how they are reacting. This party has become Trump's party. Over the last 3 years, if not more, it has become Mr. Trump's party. This would be the moment for the Republicans to make a decision whether they're Trump's party or the Republican Party. And that bloodbath is going to take place anyway. I mean, if Mr. Trump loses the election, which is very likely at this moment, if it does happen, and if it is a blowout, then the Republican Party and its leadership, including Marco Rubio, who is an aspirant for the next election, will have to find a different Republican Party or shift it towards the center that it used to be. It had these conservative ideas, excuse me, but what Trump has made it as a more white supremacist or close to white supremacist than it used to be. So there would be a bloodbath. I have no doubt in my mind. But soon after the election, if Mr. Trump raises question about the legitimacy of this election, it would incumbent on the Republican Party leadership. And Jeff, I mean, I would like to be, be with you that the Republican Party leadership would stand up and say, enough is enough. You are gone. Go ahead, go home. We are taking care of the party. If that doesn't happen, this would create a huge problem. There would be more violence, but of course, civil war is a bit exaggerated scenario.
Thank you, Ambassador Humayun Kabir. Can I just get? We'll come back to you in a minute. The question here is that what might be the impact of the recent Middle Eastern peace agreements between Israel, Abu Dhabi, and so forth? What role might that play in the election, Ambassador Bhai, Humayun Bhai?
Sorry.
You are
Thank you.
muted, Ambassador.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry. So what I was saying is, whatever we have seen in the Middle East, relationship between Israel, UAE, and Bahrain, these have, I would say, their internal Middle Eastern internal dynamic. So the American Trump administration acted there as a facilitator for that, because if you look at the regional scenario, the US is in any case winding up from Middle East, because they are not dependent on Middle Eastern oil anymore. So they will move away from that gradually, if not today, tomorrow, maybe day after tomorrow. And now the Middle Eastern kingdoms need supports. And now Israel will provide perhaps that kind of security support to them. So this dynamic has brought these countries, Israel, UAE, Bahrain, into a kind of new bond. And this bond will continue, that's my sense. But what has happened with Sudan, between Sudan and Israel, I think that might face some hiccup down the line, because we are seeing some parties in Sudan are not happy with that. They are demonstrating against that. And Sudanese government is an interim government now. So they have a legitimacy question there. Going back to earlier question that you have posed about the civil war, I think that at the end of the day, American institution will prove to be much more resilient than what we think. And as I have mentioned, that for the last week, we are seeing millions of people voting, but there has not been any violence. And voting took place where we have seen also Black Lives Matters movement, and also some of the white supremacist movement during the last few months. So what I think, my sense, I agree with Dr. Alirias, and also Mr. Mcdonald, that some hiccup may be there, but if there is a landslide in favor of Biden, then I think Trump will have to accept that reality. And yesterday he has given some indication that it would be appropriate to announce the results in the night of election. And his language is now actually improving, if I may put it. So at the end of the day, it is the American people, and I fully agree with Dr. Ali Riyaz, if they retrieve their country, then I think the threat that we are seeing from either President Trump or from the right wingers, or maybe some extreme view radicals from the left as well, they will not be able to really do any considerable damage to the institutional process or electoral process. So I am, as of now, optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bhai. A question from Amjad Hussain for Professor Mohsin. Could choosing Kamala Harris be the big winner for the Democrats?
Thank you. I think choosing Kamala Harris has been a good choice because given the Black Lives Matter movement and also what happened in 2016 and the issues, the way this COVID-19 has been handled by the Trump administration, and not only the sexism, but also the racism that has been unleashed, in the United States. It has turned the United States into a very divisive society. And the image of the country has also suffered. Uh, uh, I mean, the way one used to look upon rightly or wrongly, for whatever reasons, the way one used to look upon the United States with the immigrants issue, the kind of language that had been consistently been used. I mean, these were not only unparliamentary, but we never thought that these could be used in the diplomatic parlance. So the where I think what Ali Riaz was talking about was the way democracy has been damaged in the United States. And if I may come back to what Ambassador Humayun Kabir was talking about, the Middle East, I mean, Ambassador Humayun Kabir, if you look at the implications of it, long-term implications, that what it has done to the Muslim world, and the kind of with the Afghan peace process, which had been opened, but now again which has slowed down. I mean, these are measures which Trump had taken, but with I don't know if what the long, if they were fully cognizant of the long-term consequences. I mean, the status quo, and also the issue, like the trade war with China, and the kind of opening up another Cold War period. I mean, we are back to that. So I think with Kamala Harris being there, does tone down the kind of hyped up politics that one was seeing in the United States. And also because, as I mentioned, that the gender gap, it matters in the US electoral politics. And since 1980s, it had been there. So I do think that that is a positive thing, and it adds up to Democrats' chances. I do think so.
Thank you, Professor Mohsin. This is my last question. It is open-ended. After this, I will open up. I think we'll still have some time. I would like to throw it open for all of you, our participants, to ask questions and comments among yourselves. This is by Tanvir Ahmad Harun. If the vote goes to the Supreme Court and Joe Biden does not agree, what happens?
Can I come in?
Anyone can come in.
Okay, thank you. I think Supreme Court decision is the final decision. You will have to choose or go to. I mean, there is no next alternative left.
Okay, do you have any questions, comments for your other panelists?
Let me add, if I may,
Please.
Even before it goes to Supreme Court, if it turns out to be a situation that it is ending up in Supreme Court, I'm more concerned about that phase, because it is not going to go to Supreme Court on 4th of November or 5th of November. It will have to go through the state courts first, because the elections are not centralized, as Jeffrey has reminded us quite rightly. So what happens? What would be the challenge? The challenge is Pennsylvania has not counted its vote. Wisconsin has overcounted. Florida has not done its bit. So it has to go through the court. And that is the moment before going to the Supreme Court. That is the time we might see violence. That might end up because the Trump supporter, core supporter, not all Trump supporters, I'm not alleging that anyone is voting Trump is like that, though I have serious reservation about anyone voting for Trump at this moment. But the point is that these people who are in part of the militia, part of the white supremacist group, if they come and try to protect the counting, if they come to protect the court, what would be the consequences? I'm more concerned about that. At the end of the day, if it goes to Supreme Court, even if it is filed in Supreme Court, we know the result. What would be the verdict? We know for sure. There's no doubt in my mind that everyone has a very clear understanding as to what is going to happen. If it happens, it happens. So that is the part. But yes, I do agree with Ambassador Humayun Kabir. Once it is decided in Supreme Court, it is done. On 28th of January, in the middle of the day, Mr. Trump, or whoever that means Mr. Biden, will go on and take the oath, because U.S. Constitution does not allow the current president to be as a president after noon of 28th of January 2021. Period. There is no other option there. It is clearly written in the Constitution that his term ends. You'll have to take a new oath if it is Mr. Trump and become a president for the next 4 years. So his term ends on the noon of 20th of January 2021. Period.
Seems like we have come to a crossroads, one way or the other. I'm really looking forward to next week and see what we come up with. Will we be talking about brickbats or election results? Let me open up for any other questions, comments, ladies, gentlemen, among yourselves.
Can
Um,
I add, can I add something?
yes, please.
If the election result it is contested in the Supreme Court, even before the ruling, it will be considered as something that is not legitimate. And actually, this is the fear I have, not of a bloodbath, not of a violence, but whoever wins, the vote supporters of the other party, it doesn't even depend on Biden or Trump anymore, but some supporters, core supporters of both parties, they are not going to accept that result as legitimate. And that's something that is like really, really fearful, because that means that whole trust in the political institution that has eroded. I think that has eroded to some place that is irreversible. So whatever is the election result, even if it's a landslide, I think some people will always consider that as illegitimate. But it may not lead to a bloodbath, but it will have an impact, a slow seeping impact in eroding the political institution, the trust, and the legitimacy of the political institution.
That really illustrates the third world politics that I referred to at the start, entering the United States politics, democracy. Something else from the rest of you.
I just have a question for Ali Riaz. Is it okay, Riaz? Now, I just want to know, I was listening to this business standard thing you were having the other day. I mean, what do you think would be the implications of whatever the election results might be for this white supremacy thing? You did allude to it a little bit, but can you just elaborate a little bit more? Where do
Sure,
we?
absolutely. I mean, if time permits, we can have a conversation about it. This would be an interesting thing because it's not going to go away. First of all, the white supremacist movement, the militia movement, the racist, one thing is the structural racism that the United States have been witnessing, and it has permeated to everything, particularly criminal justice system. We have been talking about it for years. The social movement, social justice movement, the BLM movement that I see is the social justice movement. It's not only about police brutality. Police brutality is part of it because it is not only police. The criminal justice system in the United States is very much anti-Black, anti-minority. So that needs to be reformed. I'm hoping if Biden wins, he'll try. I don't know how much he can, but I'm expecting. Having said that, Timothy McVeigh was product of this system. It's not Mr. Trump who has created it. Mr. Trump has catered to it. Trump has used it. Trump has made as much political and electoral use of the white supremacy and this, quote unquote, white nationalist idea that have been in the United States. Ruby Ridge happened in this. Waco happened in this country. We are not going to forget about it. So this should remain. How to confront that is the question that if, let me put 300 times if, Biden wins, if how the FBI is going to treat, as they have the QAnon, the thing that is a conspiracy theories, they have been mainstream. One of them is now going to win and stay in the US House. I mean, these are the challenges of the new administration. If there's a new administration, that unfortunately, worst thing would be what? Worst thing would be the return of Mr. Trump in White House and continued, catering to and encouraging this, white supremacists, calling them good people, or God knows what else he's going to call them next time. So that is a battle of the United States. That is the battle of the soul of the United States that we would see. I think that is not going to go away, that will continue. But that one thing I think, Professor Mansin, that does not define United States. That does not define United States. because United States has problem, and this is a problem, but that is not what the United States is all about. The social movement is there. Look, the BLM movement emerged, how it has emerged, how it has, included not only black, not only minorities, not only Hispanic, it is white, black, brown, call it whatever color you want, because it's a social justice movement. Southern Poverty Law Centers have been fighting, legally speaking, against this supremacy for what? For a decade, if not more. Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, have been fighting against this. If I consider myself as a very tiny part of it, when I stood with BLM in my small town called Normal and Bloomington, I think that is what is being done. So most of the people in this country, I still have the faith. FBI still called QAnon as a threat, domestic terrorism. I still have a little bit of faith in some of the institutions, not much in some cases, but that does not define United States. It is a stain in the United States. It's a problem that United States is not new. For 400 years, it has been there. That is my point.
Two more questions have come up, and this is open-ended. We have not talked about it. What about the role of business in this election, particularly the software companies, IT companies? And the second question is about healthcare. Might that play a big part in determining the winner this time? Please, both of them, anyone.
Dr. Abdiaz, if you permit, can I just add a supplementary question to the three speakers from who have joined from the US?
Well, yes, if you answer the questions I asked you also later.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is again, Riaz, and this is to all three of you. When we have issues like this, the academia, because you three are in the academia, that's why I'm posing this question to you. We do play a very active role. And when we have these issues with fundamentalism, secularism, violent extremism, we come up with issues on, how to change our curriculum, and we have extensive debates on this. I mean, I just want to know about the role of the US academia on this. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Business, healthcare, anyone?
Let me add 2 cents here. Okay, healthcare is, I would say, is a big issue. 23 million Americans would lose if the Obamacare goes away. So what they are deciding is important. And not only 23 million, there are others who are affected by COVID. So healthcare is one of the major determining factor in my view that will influence the outcome of the elections. On the business side, business was a little bit hesitant about Biden, but of late we are seeing that they are coming around. They are coming around, and I'm seeing, Bloomberg and others and Wall Street people, important people, they are now talking about Biden administration, how Biden administration could also be positive in terms of continuing the economic growth in the US. So business is also perhaps now taking a positive position vis-a-vis Biden. So that's helping perhaps the Democratic Party. Technology is, we don't know, they're playing a mixed role. I mean, Facebook today has said that, well, they will allow Trump to put up whatever he wants to put up. So Facebook is playing a major role, and we have also known that almost 70% of the information that the voters are now getting are coming from social media. So social media is playing a very important role. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and so on and so forth. So they have a major role, but it is an open field. I mean, voters will have to decide which way they want to vote based on the information that they have. Thank you.
Nobody has said anything about the pandemic. I know Menas has a hand up, but let's throw in the pandemic. Is it having an impact on the elections? But Menas first.
Yeah, well, the short answer to your question about pandemic, tremendous impact. If the pandemic wouldn't be there, we would have a completely different kind of election.
Which side is it going? Which side is it favoring?
Well, it's favoring Biden because there has been this complete mismanagement, I would say criminal mismanagement, and not using the state's resources to help out the people. And that's very, very clear. And that's almost very difficult to defend, even by the Trump supporters. And that's why he has lost a lot of elderly voters. Okay, so just to go back, in terms of there was a question about business software, right? So again, there are two very important things. First, you look at the donors, and you would actually find a huge number of donors who are big donors, who are all, donating to the Biden campaign. And the second, just in the last week, the Trump administration has filed a lawsuit against Google. So those are very, very important, indication about, how the tech industry feels towards the Trump administration. But to go back to Dr. Mohsin's question about the role of academia, the role of academia has always been, there is this kind of image that it is left leaning, and most probably it's true, but it has been less reluctant to critique neoliberal policies that has created a lot of economic angst about, in the people, but it has been more aggressive in critiquing, let's say anything that comes from, like racial injustice or any kind of other social injustice, but it has been less, I think, less fair in critiquing the economic injustices. So that's the short answer.
Any other responses? Healthcare, business, pandemic.
With respect to healthcare, sorry, Jeffrey, you want to please go ahead.
I was just really just going to echo Humayun Kabir. I mean, I think the healthcare issue politically has I think helped Democrats right now. It's, Joe Biden has really emphasized Obamacare, which is the Democratic healthcare plan under Obama that has become progressively more popular, while Trump administration has been trying to undermine it. So I think the healthcare message has been a key issue for Democrats in the election. And on business issues, traditionally Republicans are pro-business, right? And Trump has been emphasizing the rising stock market. But I tend to agree. I think it's a bit more mixed, and there are certainly segments of the business community that support Biden.
With respect to the healthcare issue, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to the healthcare issue, even before the next administration comes, as a matter of fact, within 7 days of the election, the healthcare issue would be determined in the Supreme Court. There is a hearing on 10th of November, if I'm not mistaken, and the push that Trump administration and Mr. Trump personally has done with respect to having the justice, having the 9 justice there, because to make sure that even if it is divided 4-4, which it could have been given Chief Justice Roberts' position, which he has shifted on various occasions. He's the one who was the deciding factor in making sure the Obamacare stays. Let's not forget. So Mr. Trump didn't take the risk. So even before the next administration comes, actually, healthcare, the way it is challenged now, and if the current composition of Supreme Court votes as it's anticipated to be voting, then it is going to be gone. The personal mandate is gone already. One of the key pillars of the Affordable Care Act, i.e., Obamacare, and now they want to take the whole thing out. And that has affected, of course, millions of people, and it is going to be affected. And for the past 4 years, Mr. Trump has been telling us, oh, it is going to be replaced. We haven't heard what he's replacing it with. There's no plan for last 4 years. Still on the election campaign, keep on talking. We are going to replace it. God knows. But it is going to be an issue. It is not only an election issue. And to me, at least my understanding, election, healthcare was an issue in 2018, which helped Democrats to capture the House. And then it has remained an issue. COVID notwithstanding, it would have been an issue anyway, but COVID has accentuated, and I cannot agree more with Professor Mena's moment that the Trump administration's actions are criminal with respect to this. There are other instances, for example, the issue of the separation, which I think they should be prosecuted later, those people who have done this kind of thing, the family separation, losing children's parents, in the process, tracking them. So all these things say the business part is that increasingly the Democrat Party has shifted from the labor to the business. That has been happening, and Biden is now picking up, as Ambassador Kabir has rightly pointed out. The business sees an opportunity with the Democratic Party, but it is not one over the other. I mean, this is pretty much a balanced thing between the Republicans and the Democrats.
What's going to win the election next week? Is it going to be a collection of domestic issues or foreign issues led by China?
I don't think the international issues, foreign relations, have much of an impact on electorate. I mean, the voters, when they go to vote, they cast their vote, might be on their back that China comes in because of the trade issue, basically, the trade, the way it has been framed. Otherwise, whether Mr. Trump has succeeded in signing a treaty between Sudan and Israel, someone in Bloomington Normal is voting based on that. I don't think they have ever heard where Sudan is. I don't think they care about where the Sudan is.
But in 4 years ago, the wall, building the wall was the big issue. Is that wall and are illegal immigrants anything on the spectrum today, this election?
Okay, let me answer this because I'm sitting in Laredo, like literally 3 miles away from the wall. Okay. And this whole, image about the wall, that it is going to stop the illegal immigration or drug, peddling, is actually something that is completely false. Most of the drugs and most people also come through the legal channel. They come through the bridge. And because we don't want to stop the traffic, we don't want to harm the trade, we don't want to slow down the trade, we actually don't even check 1% of the trucks and trailers that are coming from Mexico. So we don't focus on the illegitimate trade, but we focus on the trade route. Okay, so that's the emphasis. And where I am, the border is actually the Rio Grande River. So you can't build the wall in the river. You cannot even build the wall along the river because you cannot, do the construction there. You'd actually have to build it way in the city. And our downtown is a historic downtown that will be completely divided. There will be a lot of environmental consequences because that's the river actually supplies the drinking water for Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, actually a big area of Webb County. So it will be just something that's a disaster, and it's going to cost, I think, $2 million per mile. And, it's a huge cost. And even after building that wall, the maintenance cost is also going to be very, very high. But when you take in the numbers, when you look at the numbers, it's actually something just like, an enormous disaster in making. But the companies which are getting no bid contract, actually the company which built the pipeline in North Dakota, that's the same company which got the contract in Webb County, and they have already started the construction. And there are a lot of local protests going on. I'm part of one group, and there has been a lot of what Ali Riaz was saying, in terms of the social protest. And this is about the, wall. And that is actually very much, like very active. And for the first time, actually making a huge impact on the local election. So that will be something that will be interesting to see, where it goes.
We should also take a note that only 9 miles of new walls were erected by Mr. Trump. 9 miles. And yes, Mexico didn't pay for a single penny out of it. All those were reconstruction. Previously, those wells were there. Those needed to be reconstructed or renovated. That partly have been done, not in thousands of miles. And Mr. Trump doesn't talk about it anymore.
But there has been like billions of dollars of contract which has already been allocated. So that's why even when we're talking about a Biden administration, it will be very difficult to just completely cancel everything. So this is actually more serious. This is not only something political or cultural. This is a huge amount of money involved there.
Just one question. Yeah. Just one, Professor Imtiaz, if I could just add one more on those issues, if I have your permission. Just a small thought I'd like to share. Whether it's Trump again for a second time, or whether it's Joe Biden, one thing is evidently clear, that America is in need of an internal reform, almost like the New Deal under FDR or Lyndon Johnson's the New Society that he proposed. And one of the problems that you talked about, business and technology, and as an economist, it seems like a crime to remain quiet about this. Some of the leading linchpins or titans of industry, like the Koch brothers, who were traditionally supporters of the neoliberal mantra and began in the 80s, they had started a movement against Trump actually 2 years back. And the idea is that Trump, in the long run, is not good for US business, because even after decoupling, the recent surveys have concluded that at least 70% of US companies will still stay in China as they are. So, and again, in terms of the global supply chain, it's very difficult to disengage from China as of there. And in terms of technological companies, there's just one point. There is an issue of the H-1B visas, the highly skilled immigrants that you bring in, especially from India and other places. So Silicon Valley and other places and the tech companies that are reliant on Chinese technological cooperation or against skilled labor, they are the ones who are very actively pursuing, especially out of Silicon Valley and other places, against campaign against Trump. So that also needs to be factored in. And in terms of business, they realize that, again, President Trump can give it short-term results, but in long-term results, they're ambiguous at best. So whether it's a Republican election victory or a Democratic election victory, an internal societal reform in America will be something in the making, whether by choice or by compulsion. Thank you.
Thank you, Parvez. We have to close very soon, but I would like to see some of you, in fact, all of you back. Some will be on the panel speaking, and we would like to hear from the rest of you. I really enjoyed it. I will let one final comment from you before we close. It's getting on to 10 o'clock at night here in Dhaka. So we have to close shop. But one word from any or each of you, please.
US election this year is a once in a century election, not only because of COVID. This is a turning point for US society and politics and its role in the global politics. That's how I see it. I'm optimistic that the electorate would make the right decision. The participation is up. This is a sign of optimism, but the challenges are difficult and hard. And the next days and weeks will test the integrity of the electoral system and the resilience of the US institution and the commitment of the US citizens towards democracy.
Thank you, Professor Riaz, who, by the way, is a Dhaka hero. This is not the only webinar he is in, but anyone else, anything else?
I guess it is a defining moment. Riaz was trying to say that, this is not what America is or who Americans are, but I think this election would determine who Americans are actually.
Thank you, Professor Mohsin.
I'll just add to conclude, I think the election is about, in part, the norms of politics in the United States, right? And I think there has been a coarsening of the rhetoric in American politics and a violation, for better or worse, of the traditional norms around political behavior, right? And I think a re-election of Donald Trump will continue that shift in norms in the country, whereas in Joe Biden, there will be at least an attempt to return to some of those norms of political behavior. Some would view that as a negative thing, but I think that in many ways is what's on the ballot, is these traditional norms versus the kind of the continuing shift away from a lot of what had defined American politics for quite some time.
That's a fine note to close on. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Jeffrey for wanting to step in case we had a power failure here. You're still on track next week if that happens. Ambassador Bhai, please, why don't you close the show tonight?
Oh, well, thank you very much. I think all our very distinguished participants have rightly pointed out that it will be a defining election. It will be a watershed election in the US history, because US has been in a kind of, you can say, meandering path for the last few decades. Now they will have to decide which way they will go. In terms of the instruments of this mobilization, my sense is that the Democratic Party will now veer towards left, towards social justice, equity, climate, and so on and so forth. And the Republican Party will have to perhaps come from the right to the center with regard to addressing the challenges that US will have to confront in the future. So it's a defining election for the US, and I would say that it would be a defining moment for the world, because US domestic politics will define US foreign policy as well. How much US can engage with the outside world, and in which manner and which ways. So for us, well, we are in a kind of, you can say, transformation. I think we all look forward to the US electorate. I mean, we hope that they will show the right way for themselves and also help us to understand US better in the right perspective. Thank you, Professor Imtiaz, for your kind, I would say, invitation and an excellent discussion on the US election.
Thank you, Ambassador Bhai. 1 minute for a Texan closing to this, Menas, and 1 minute for a Dhaka closing to this, Menon.
Okay, I'm not that optimistic about the future, regardless of the election result. I think the polls, like indicate that Biden is going to win, but whether or not we are going to see, what Professor Abbasi said about the internal reform, and especially in terms of economic justice, I don't see that coming from either administration. That's one of the things I'm, disappointed and pessimistic about. But in terms of the election result, I mean, I agree with everyone. This is a watershed moment, and I'm also holding my breath and, waiting for it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the discussion was quite very interesting to me, and there will be a very good reporting on it. But what I see that this year, for the journalists, the election coverage of United States is really, really getting tougher. When the situation is so different, so journalists are getting facing more different situation in the when they are covering it. And especially COVID is compelling them to do something which is really about them to do many things, and at the same time the other things which are coming in are compelling them to stop or not writing, not to do something that is very important, I should say. And let us hope that all this situation will come over, and someday we will get a very good situation to do journalism again.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you so much. Have a great night and look forward to seeing you and hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank
you very much, sir. Thank you.
Participants.
Sir, Assalamualaikum, Humayun sir. Thank you, sir. Assalamualaikum, sir.
Well said, well said. Okay, Assalamualaikum and
Sure.
good evening. Jeffrey,
Dua karo,
good
sir.
morning
Dua karo.
and have a nice day. Thank you. Bye. Professor Menas, moment.